Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to join us on our webinar, Solar in Transition. We are recording this webinar and we'll be sending it out to you, so you can refer back to it or pass it along to anyone you think could benefit, or maybe someone couldn't make it today. This will be available to pass along. My name is Sarah Hawk. I'm the Sales and Marketing Coordinator at Coral Reef Partners. I'm joined by Corey Wolff, our President and CEO, and Miles Johnston, our Director of Business Development. Our goal today is to highlight the RISE PA grant program, explain how it works and how it aids in helping the industrial sector switch to renewables, and how Coral Reef can help you get started with that. And we'll touch on the pending legislation we're all watching pretty closely. We want to thank our partners at the Cumberland Area Economic Development Corporation for helping us promote the webinar. This is an interactive session, so we will be pausing throughout for questions, and we'll have a few minutes at the end for Q&A. But feel free to raise your hand or put your questions into the chat. And with that, I will turn it over to Corey.
Thanks, Sarah. Please excuse my voice. I've got a little bout of COVID, so I'll try to get through this without coughing. My apologies in advance if I do. So just a little background. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about Coral Reef. You know, really this webinar is really designed to help you understand if solar is an option and something that would make sense for your business, your school, your community, depending on what industry you're from. But to just give you a little context, a little color about who we are and what we've been working on, I'll just talk a little bit about Coral Reef. So Coral Reef is an EPC, and an EPC typically does engineering, procurement, and construction of solar projects. We are about roughly 140 people right now. That usually ranges from about 130 to 150, depending on workflow and where we're working on projects. We've worked on roughly 300 projects in 14 states, and we've installed or participated in the installation of roughly 200 megawatts of solar. We are a little unique. I'd say we're very unique. There's not a lot of companies in the solar space that self-perform. So one of the things that's kind of nice is if a client's interested, we get to work with them from the beginning, a site assessment, utility bill review, you know, really the financial modeling, all the way through construction and then the maintenance of a project. Our operating and maintenance team, one of the keys to having a successful project is having a solar system that functions properly for the next 20 to 25 years. Solar projects are investments that will last a long time. They will be, you know, they'll last a similar time frame to a roof or you know, some other major infrastructure investment. So it's always nice to maintain that asset. And then the last thing is we work a lot with different financiers, whether it's providing PPAs or bank financing or other creative ways. We work really hard to try to help create a solution for our customers. Just to give you a little bit of overview in terms of this is just a good snapshot of the projects we've been working on the last 18 months. You can see you know, a lot of our work focused on Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, Illinois, but we're doing a lot of work in New York. We're working in New Hampshire, Virginia, Delaware. And then a lot of commercial, industrial, agriculture, do a ton of school work, have performed a lot in school markets. So, you know, got kind of diverse list and number of clients. So enough about Coral Reef. I just want to kind of give you a little bit of an overview. I know some of the attendees, some of the people on the phone have a really good sense of what solar is. Others may be new to it. So what I always try to do is talk a little bit of how it works. Just give you a real high level, just spend a couple of minutes communicating that. So all projects are typically connected to the grid. There's a few fundamental parts to understand. Panels ultimately absorb sunlight, generating DC energy. That power flows via wire to the inverters that convert that power from DC to AC, which is what is used on the grid. That power is either utilized in your facility or push back to the grid. Fortunately, for each kilowatt hour that goes back to the grid, you'll receive some type of credit. That is called net metering, and that's ultimately a key attribute and a benefit. But by most of those markets that we work in.
Why
All right, Miles,
businesses.
go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Corey. So I'm going to talk about why businesses are embracing solar amongst a few other topics. The number one reason is the financial benefit. Solar started as something you do if you cared about the environment. It has evolved into something to do if you care about your bottom line. Electricity is one of the biggest expenses for any business. Budgeting, planning, it's really important for any organization, but as electricity prices fluctuate, that gets harder to do. So over the last decade, we've seen utility prices fluctuate between 6 cents per kilowatt hour to 15 cents per kilowatt hour. On the other hand, solar and any solar project, as opposed to the utility, helps fix your cost of electricity and give that budget certainty. The best projects will produce power for less than a few pennies per kilowatt hour on average, and we're talking about 30-plus-year assets, which can meet your electricity needs at a fraction of your current electricity costs. Aside from the financial benefits, many businesses implement solar as part of a sustainability initiative. One of the nice parts about solar is that it's really easy to track. The project will produce clean electricity in kilowatt hours, which is a metric that can be easily equated to a reduction in carbon footprint. So like we'll track and monitor the system production, and you'll have access to a portal which shows that production in real time. The portal would say something like 10,000 kilowatt hours produced in the last 12 hours, which is equal to 7 tons of carbon abated or 110 trees planted. And you can list that information on your website, your packaging, or whatever reporting as part of an ESG initiative. Go to the next slide. All right, so there's really 3 ways to implement solar or participate in a solar project. We like to think of them in terms of risk and return. That's the main difference between the 3. So you've got, your highest risk, highest return is a system purchase, owning and operating your own solar system. So with that, you would own the power that's produced, you would own the system itself, and like Corey said, you should really think of this project as an investment. Most projects pay themselves back within 4 to 6 years, or the best projects pay themselves back within 4 to 6 years. And, these are 30-year assets at a very minimum. So owning your own solar project can be extremely lucrative. Now, the downside to self-ownership is that you have to make the capital expenditure, and that CapEx can be cost prohibitive. We're talking about systems that are typically between $1 million and $5 million. So most clients aren't paying cash for that. They will finance the system, and you'll get all these tax credits and other cash incentives back within a year to, help with that CapEx. But just coming up with the money, on day one can be a challenge. In those cases where, coming up with the covering the cost up front is a concern, we'll offer a power purchase agreement. So in that, kind of second category, this is the power purchase agreement, short for, or PPA for short, is the medium risk, medium return option. Coral Reef or third party would own and operate the system and sell you electricity at a predetermined below market rate. So again, like Coral Reef or a third party would take on all the ownership risk and operating risk, take on all the incentives, and simply sell you electricity for 20 plus years at some predetermined rate. So for example, if you're paying 10 cents per kilowatt hour to the utility, we might be able to offer you a PPA for the same amount of electricity for 6 cents per kilowatt hour. And one of the best parts about a PPA is that the rate is predetermined. So you always know what you'll be paying for power, and you can achieve that budget certainty without having to purchase or own your own system. You can avoid that CapEx while still getting guaranteed energy savings over the next few decades. Now here's the last option. Not quite, thanks. The last option is going to be the land or roof lease. So that's very similar to a PPA in that Coral Reef or a third party would be 100% responsible for all the costs. It's us or a third party owning and operating the system. The only real difference is that with a PPA, you are getting bill savings, and with the land or roof lease, you're just going to get a check in the mail. Every month we'll pay you a rate for using, the land or the roof space. Can move on to the next.
We had a question
Oh.
roll in. What is the simplest way to do solar?
Oh, good question.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Corey. Do you want to take that?
No, I'm going to say a PPA. So a power purchase agreement is the most commonly about 85% of solar is actually owned under some kind of PPA structure in the entire United States. That means the third party buys that equipment, and then ultimately acts as a utility, selling you power at a much lower rate than the utility is. So that's the easiest, because it's just like you buying power. It's an easier transaction than most. If you actually pay cash for a project, you have to go through approvals and bank financing, and how are you going to pay for it? CapEx approvals. So typically your power purchase agreement makes it move quickly. And I saw a note there about your typical terms. So power purchase agreements are typically 20 to 25 years. And there is a termination clause. So every PPA, like we have a lot of big corporate clients we work with around the country, and they may want to put solar on a building, but they don't want to, if they want to close that building in 8 or 10 years because something changes, they want to make sure they have an exit strategy. So typically there's a termination clause, so you can basically buy that contract out and move on. Okay. I was just responding to a real-time question there, so go ahead, Miles.
Great, thanks, Corey.
Yeah.
All right, so solar incentives. Incentives are the key to the financials for any project. The system owner will always get some incentives, but that amount can vary across markets and type of project. So when you're working with us, we will always quantify the project's incentives, and we try to focus our energy and attention on, where incentives are the highest. So right now, if you're looking at the pie chart, this is the current incentive landscape. They're at an all-time high. In a nutshell, roughly half of the project is going to be subsidized. Like I said, the highest quality projects pay themselves back within 4 to 6 years, but there are some unique incentive programs that can accelerate that payback, like the Rise PA program. So we'll circle back to that. Go next for now.
I had another question. Seems like incentives are constantly changing. How do they compare to historical or future subsidies?
Yeah.
Well, I'll talk a little bit about future subsidies here in a slide or two, but I'd say relative to historic, the cost to install, like the levelized cost of energy to adopt solar is an all-time really low. So if we take a snapshot and look at how much your solar system will produce, the cost of that power over 20 years, married up with incentives, it's at an all-time low cost. So that basically allow you to lock in your rate a lot of times below 4 cents per kilowatt hour over the next 20 to 25 years if you're investing. Now, if you're doing a PPA, it changes a little bit because there's a third party that's obviously, going to be making the investment. It's not intrinsically quite as efficient, but it'll still be, could be in the 5 to 6 cent range, which gives you a lot of opportunity.
Thanks, Corey. All right, so I'll be quick here, because I'm guessing most of our audience is in PJM territory, but maybe not everyone. But if you are in PJM territory, this piece is really important. So PJM, who manages the power grid for 13 states, including Pennsylvania, announced increased capacity pricing, which will increase the overall cost of electricity for any utility in its jurisdiction. And you can see the map here up on the screen. So, on average, the important piece to take home is that costs will increase by $0.015 to 2.5 cents per kilowatt hour. Meaning if your last electric supply contract was for 7 cents, if you went to get a renewal today, you're going to see offers in the 8 to 9 cents range. This went into effect June 1st. So a lot of the audience might still be on an old supply contract. Again, if you went to your broker and asked for renewal pricing, you'll see the impact of that PJM announcement. You'll see a supply rate in that 8 to 9 to maybe 10 cents range based on that announcement on June 1st. So the last thing I'll say here is that that cost is not a temporary flash in the pan. It's being driven by increased electricity demand, which is not going to slow down. AI, cloud computing technology, we're entering a new era driven by supercomputing, which takes up a ton of energy. Costs will continue to increase as we implement more AI and more computing technology into our everyday lives.
So one of the things that we wanted to talk a little bit, we're obviously going to talk about the RISE program, but we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about some of the pending legislation that ultimately will impact solar. So is current legislation is being debated. You probably have heard that the big beautiful bill that's coming out of the House went to the Senate, is under debate, and they did. I mean, I think last night they had an all night session. So they're working. Their goal was to try to pass something by July 4th. That was the target. I don't know if it's achievable yet or not. There has been there's a lot of language in it relative to unwinding the Inflation Reduction Act. So our current investment tax credit, which represents a large percentage and a big value for solar, that helps make it more compelling as an investment alternative for companies like yours, is driven by the investment tax credit, and it's a critical part of it. So that's the bad news. The bad news is there's going to be a modification. The good news is that there is multiple ways to safe harbor and preserve the tax credit. So if you're interested in saving a lot of money on your power bill, if you're interested in potentially, if you've been looking at solar, if you looked at an option before where you want to make an investment, you still have time to act. So the goal would be to ultimately, if you're new to it, we could do a relatively quick assessment. We could evaluate system size, opportunity. We can still, if you're new to it and starting at zero, we could still safe harbor it. Right now, we'd have to safe harbor the project by the end of the year. And the deadline for when it has to be completed, that's the part that's been jumping around. The House bill had it at the end of 28, December 31st, 2028, meaning it had to be completed. The latest version, the Senate Finance Committee moved it to the end of 29, and then I just read there has been an update where it might be the end of 27. So that's going to create some issues on projects, but ultimately the legislation is still pending, has not been agreed upon, but this will be big news. I mean, I think everybody's seen the news that there's a lot of Medicaid conversations. Well, there's a huge part of this that will unwind, like the residential investment tax credit would go to zero. There'd be no more residential tax credit. At least with the commercial, the tax credit that we work under, there is a staggering and a step down, which will give us some opportunity to safe harbor projects for you, but we'll have to move very quickly. Miles, you want to talk a little bit about the RISE grant program and the specific nature of that?
Absolutely. So I know a lot of folks here probably attended just to talk about RISE PA. This grant program is extremely lucrative, extremely generous. It's probably the best incentive program we've seen in the space. I mentioned that roughly half of any solar project would be subsidized by federal and state incentives. This program will subsidize the other half. So, just high level, RISE PA is a grant program that pays for half of the project cost up to $20 million. For context, there was a similar grant program called the Reef Grant, which has been discontinued. That paid for 30% of the project cost, which was generous. This is paying for up to 50%. 11 of our 12 REAP grant applications were awarded. We expect similar success with this RISE PA grant program, since there is a lot more money in the fund and a lot less competition. Again, so 11 of our 12 REAP applications were awarded. We're expecting that type of success with RISE PA. So we will apply and reserve the funding on your behalf. The program ends on August 29th, and the application is intensive, so we'll need consent to apply on your behalf by the end of July. So if you've got a strong project, we will do the application for free because we are that optimistic about your chances of award. You can go on to the next. So I'll be brief here. I just want to show that when you stack the standard incentives with the RISE PA grant, the project is close to 100% subsidized. So if you look at the pie chart there, RISE PA, we put in a 40% grant award and you'll get to 94% subsidy when you stack the other incentives. Another thing to note is that you don't have to buy and own the system yourself to get this grant. In other words, we can apply the grant to a PPA or a power purchase agreement, which would further reduce the price. So I'll demonstrate that on the next slide. Here.
Miles,
We actually have a couple.
Yeah,
Go
couple
ahead.
questions.
Oh, sorry.
Here.
I can't
No,
see
that's
the
right.
questions.
I'm reading them. So yeah, start to finish, Sean. So typically a timeline on a start to finish on a project is more or less a year. So in the worst part of, the biggest downside of solar is there's a lot of upfront work that you have to do, largely interconnection application and permitting approval. It depends on the type of project. If it's a roof project, your biggest critical path item is going to be interconnection, and that can take anywhere from 100 to 180 days to get approval back from the utility. If it's a ground mount where you might have to get some land use approvals, an NPDS permit, et cetera, you're going to see an extended timetable. That could be 18 months from the moment you say, yes, I want to move, to we're actually completed the project and it's fully interconnected. Okay. Second thing was so the RISE PA grants are good. They are controlled by Pennsylvania. They have the funding. There is no ability for the current administration to claw that back. So that money is secure. Miles, you want to move on, just talk a little bit about what it means to their PPA price?
Mm-hmm. Ready for the next slide.
Yeah.
Thanks. All right, so let's take one of these projects, for example, the 4 megawatt project up at the top row there. So we will apply for the grant, and if we don't get it, then we could offer a PPA for 7.8 cents per kilowatt hour. Now, every project is unique. This is a standard kind of price sheet. We're carrying some assumptions here, but it's very close to what any potential project would land. So 7.8 cents per kilowatt hour would be a PPA offer that is standard for a 4 megawatt project. Could be even cheaper. If we apply for the grant and get it, we could do a PPA for 5.8 cents per kilowatt hour. We don't know what the grant award's going to be, so we're just, these numbers are our best guess for where things should land, but it just goes to show you, if you can get the grant, it can drastically reduce your PPA price. And this 5.8 cents per kilowatt hour number, that's for 30 years. So you'd be buying power from the system for that rate fixed over 30 years, which is a really good opportunity.
I have a question come in here.
Mhm.
What are the risks? What are the risks for the grant and a PPA? Like if you don't get the grant, but you've already spent time and money developing the project.
Mhm.
So on the grant, there is no risk. But we are going to, like, for those that want to safe harbor the project, and when I say safe harbor, the idea would be, okay, we're going to have to safe harbor to preserve the rebate. You may not know about the RISE grant in advance. So we have to sign an agreement to proceed. We're probably only going to be out of pocket for the interconnection application fee. So it'd be a very minimal, very low cost transaction to terminate. And like as Miles said, the RISE grant, we're gonna write that grant at risk. So that's ultimately, but typically the way these are written, excuse me, is that, hey, if it's conditional, if you get this, if we get you a grant and we safe harbor the project, you're agreeing to proceed as long as we can deliver a PPA at a certain rate, et cetera. So there is a commitment that has to happen on your end while we spend resources on it. So just to highlight a couple industries, so we've broken these things down, into kind of, where does it make a lot of sense? Where do we see a lot of solar being adopted? Long and the short of it is, the more power you're utilizing and the more pain the escalating energy costs become, the better solar is as an opportunity. I will say solar is somewhat space inefficient. So it's if you have a big load, it's obviously important that you have some real estate and or a roof, or a place to put it, and you have to really think about what that might look like and what does that mean to the overall business and the future, in terms of future plans. But we see a lot of projects, obviously in manufacturing, warehousing, very energy intense. You tend to use power at the peak moments. You're going to have a high capacity transmission cost. Solar can really help dent that. School districts, agriculture, real estate's got lots of roof space, shopping malls, et cetera. Those are always good opportunities. In terms of applications, so there's not a type of project that we haven't done. Every type of ground mount we've built on landfills. We've put pile driven foundations in screws. We've built on the side of 30-degree slopes. Roof, we've done every type of roof application, and then we've done a lot of custom canopies and different solutions. So just biggest considerations, ground and roof are always going to be your most cost-effective opportunity. We see certain markets that where clients will be paying 18 to 20 cents a kilowatt hour. They'll be interested in canopies. We see a lot of canopies in New Jersey, New York, even Illinois, places where there's some more incentives, just because the cost of a canopy is considerably more because you're building a whole separate structure. Sorry here. I'm just going to answer a real quick a conversation. Daryl, there was there's no escalator in those slides that we just provided for the kilowatt hour prices based on applying for the RISE program. Miles, they were fixed, right?
Yes.
Okay. And this slide just encompasses, these are just some good reference projects that we've done, all manufacturers, different industries, et cetera, but we've done them all recently and all sizable, and they're all different applications. Ground mounts, flush mounts. We did several new roofs with clients. We helped them accomplish a new roof, ballasted systems, et cetera. Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just reading Daryl's follow-up.
It looks like we had another one come in too.
Yeah. What happens in a PPA arrangement if the PV system produces more? It's a great question. So the nice thing about markets we work in, specifically in Pennsylvania and a lot of other markets. Now, every utility in every state have a little different rules. If you're in Pennsylvania, for instance, Pennsylvania, you can overproduce. So I could build a system, offset my power, and if I overproduce by 50%, the utility is required to pay me for that. Now, the excess payment will typically come in one payment after the end of May, but you will see excess generation that gets paid for. Other markets, you're capped sometimes on how much you can overproduce, but you'll get value for that. So that's why we have to size the system to correspond with your load and how much power you're using. The other question I see here is who owns the SRECs or the renewable energy credits? They typically stay with the owner. So if you make a purchase, it's a cash purchase, and you want the RECs, you make a cash purchase, you're buying it, you own the renewable energy credits. If it's a PPA, they typically default to the owner of the system. So it's usually the investor that owns that. However, we've done several projects where we have given the RECs to the host. If you're a business, we own a solar system on your roof, we can actually bake in the renewable energy credits into your PPA cost, where you might pay a little bit more for your power, but you get the RECs so you can hit your ESG, your renewable energy standard, your goals. All right, Miles, you want to wrap it up?
Absolutely. So, two things. First, everyone, thanks for joining. If you are interested, please reach out. We will do full evaluation. Just need an address, a utility bill, and where you would like to put it. So our proposal, we'll generate a proposal that quantifies the project, and we'll describe all the different variables. Ultimately, we'll give you a decision-making tool, and you can make an informed decision. The RISE PA grant expires soon. These tax incentives are being stepped down potentially at the end of the year. So please engage quickly so we can preserve these incentives and keep your options open.
Thanks, Miles. We will be, yep, I'm just reading an email or a question here. We'll be emailing the presentation out. And if you have, we'll also have direct follow-up with the entire team. So we will reach out to you if you have questions, you want to talk about projects. Our consultants will help facilitate, getting bills, working through different questions. That it takes a team effort, but that would be the next steps. Any other questions, considerations, Sarah? Do you want to take it from here?
Sure. Yeah. Any other? Yeah. This is time for you guys to ask any questions that maybe didn't get answered during the presentation. Just drop them into the chat. You see anything come in here? But and I'm sorry if you guys see my mouse hovering over. Here we go. How long does the project take to start to finish?
Yeah, I mentioned that a little bit earlier, but it's typically it depends. Again, if it's a small system, you might be able to do it inside of 7 to 9 months. Your typical system from beginning to end, from the time you're working on interconnection and starting the due diligence, that's typically 6 months. And then based on how big that system is, it could be, a year to 18 months, depending on size. I will say the part that goes the quickest, which is always very surprising to people, is the build. The build is actually fairly quick, if it's a 4 or 5 megawatt project, we're going to be on site for 4 to 6 months, depending on the application. But the build is quicker than you think, but all the paperwork and the nuance and things that we have to do before the project even gets started is the critical part. So for a PPA, I just see a note here for maintaining. Yep. So there's no risk, no exposure. If you sign a PPA, you don't have to worry about the system at all. So it's a responsibility of the owner, us, either we directly own it or one of our partners owns it, but it's our responsibility to maintain those, to make sure that if there's a failed panel or inverters, et cetera, we handle that and make sure it's been resolved.
These are all great questions. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, this is great. But if there's no other questions, we can wrap it up here. I've put everybody's contact information on the screen for you. We will be sending out a copy of the recording this afternoon. And like Corey said, our team will follow up with you this week. If you do think of anything after we end the meeting, feel free to reach out. Thank you again, Cumberland Area Economic Development Corporation, for helping us promote this. I think this went really well, and we appreciate you all attending.